Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Today, in honor of Halloween, we'd like to tell you a horror story. Farmer Freddie K has just had his best crop season ever. Most of his fields made record yields in both corn and soybeans. There were, of course, some low-yielding areas, but with the tractor and combine data he's collected all season, scouting reports, and the investment in aerial imagery this year, Freddie K believes that he can tie all that information together to come up with a plan to improve those areas. After harvest, he sits down at his computer to look at the planter and harvest data, but it's all gone. Now, Freddie resorts to terrorizing kids in their dreams. This truly is a horror story for farmers who've made the investment in technology and want to utilize it to improve farming practices. Unfortunately, it happens frequently where data is unusable for one reason or another. Joining us today is Dr. John Fulton with the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Biological Engineering. He's our precision ag specialist and works closely with my co-host Elizabeth on research and outreach to improve precision ag use across the state. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
So, John, harvest is winding down in our parts of the state. What tips do you have for guys to make sure that all of that harvest data is captured?
Well, I think first that we're kind of getting it in the season here in Ohio, and maybe for a lot, we're already at the end of the harvest season. So the kind of the first step I'd take would be is go ahead and as you clean up your combines and maybe other equipment from the season, hit the export button on the displays, and just, whether that's the thumb drive or compact flash, whatever is required for those displays, but export all that data and just make sure you got it archived, all that display data for 2018 here.
So another thing we talk about is how important it is to make a copy of that raw data before you start doing any post-processing. Why is that so important?
Well, we ultimately, a lot of the software packages or platforms like to read in that raw data to kind of start from as it relates to processing that data. And so making a copy of that and making sure that that's backed up becomes very important, especially if you're planning on or you're working with your trusted advisors in the future and you want to come back to 2018. Again, a lot of times they'll ask for kind of that raw or display data to begin with in terms of and we'll talk about harvest data here, but I want to create a yield map for 2018. They want to get back to that raw data to start that process. So I would suggest or even recommend to growers to make sure that once you have that downloaded on a thumb drive, that you make a folder either on an external hard drive or use some kind of cloud storage or somewhere, and just make a backup copy of that harvest data, or even for all of the 2018 season data. That way you have that somewhere in a secure and safe location that can be accessed not only today, but more importantly in the future as more and more people start to utilize data.
So what other types, I know we collect all sorts of data on the farm, what types of data do you think is good to keep in addition to that yield data that you might use?
I think it's if the with planters today and the technology that's being on the tractors or in the tractors, that I think having the as planted data becomes very important. This, make sure that you can go back and say, I had either through prescription or I wanted to plant a certain rate, that you can confirm that, here at the end of the season, that exactly what got planted where. So as planted data, I think is very important. Any kind of as applied data that relates to crop nutrition, so fertilizer application becomes important. Again, it just kind of confirms what you planned got done and done properly when you look back. And then I think the other thing is if you got some of your crop protection records, again, running a lot of these sprayers today can create a coverage map for you, just confirm what got done out in the field. And so as you look back, especially through your yield data or you're kind of looking through fields, sometimes you see things and you're trying to explain what happened, whether it's low or I'm seeing something that's just not normal in that area of the field. At least you can go back to some of these other field operations and see, did I get what I wanted planted there, yes or no? And when I went to my crop nutrition, whether that's side dress or mid-season, late season, whatever that may be, hey, I got out there what I want. And then on crop protection, I mean, herbicides in particular, I mean, occasionally some things may be in question, but having those records can help you begin to kind of dive into those end of season results and maybe look at if you see something going on, really help confirm or maybe explain in some cases, kind of what's happening in yield maps.
So you mentioned cloud storage, exporting data. This is kind of a whole nother can of worms, I guess, but what about data ownership?
Well, data ownership it continues and probably will be for some time. Something that farmers need to think about, and so there are a lot of platforms that have telemetry options where data is moving from the machines directly into their platform or cloud type atmosphere. And when you think about, or if you have concerns about data ownership and the rights around the utilization of that data that might be coming out of your fields, I think you should look through the terms and conditions or have someone that might have a little bit of knowledge about that explain that to you. I don't think, a lot of times you say, well, you need a lawyer for that. That kind of may be the case, and if you really want to get to the fine-tuned details. But at the end of the day, what I would say is that there's the Ag Data Transparency tool. Ag Data Transparency, you can search that on the internet, but you can go to there and see what companies have gone through that process. And one of the questions that is asked and confirmed legally is, data ownership right there. So I think that's a resource for farmers or farmers and trusted advisors that who owns or who has access to that data. You can go right there for those that have gone through that process. But I think if a grower is truly concerned, about ownership, that they need to look into the terms and conditions, and if that doesn't suffice, then they need to be thinking about how do I just store that data locally and make sure it stays locally until they come up when either confident or comfortable of using some of these other tools that are out there.
It does offer a lot of convenience in some ways, but still something we need to be aware of.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, to your point, Amanda, we live in this connected world today, and whether it's machines or it's all the smartphones and iPads and tablets that we're all carrying in agriculture. I mean, a high number, we know that's north of 85%. In some areas, it's north of 90% of farmers and folks serving farmers have a connected device. And so it's just a different world, and again, that brings some changes which we're living through today in agriculture. But as you do business and you think about what data might be doing, or what kind of impact data may start to have on your farm, I mean, you need to be aware of these. There's who's connected and how data can be used, and what information can I draw. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, if I'm collecting data, I would be hoping that I can somehow draw some kind of information from it. If not, it's not being a resource for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up with the data sharing that's going on, is that it's very important to pay attention to who has access to your data and how they're using it. I think that's very important.
Well, and Elizabeth, you're part of the project last year. We went out and basically surveyed soybean producers, and these are cutting edge soybean producers, to be make sure you understand that. But we were asking these producers, they're kind of all in on precision ag and also trying to use data. But I think we saw out of the survey that 90% are sharing data with someone exterior to the farm. And 66% were sharing with two or more people exterior to the farm. So, I mean, I think that gives you a glimpse of where things are going to be in the next few years, that farmers are going to be sharing more and more data to bring services, recs, information, whatever, in the future. And so understanding who you're sharing with and what kind of, value you get back is pretty important.
So this technology is changing so fast, and it's really hard for a lot of us to keep up with it. And we may not even understand what data is being collected, but you feel that that's a really important point, that we do know that because it is our data.
I think, with the level of adoption of, we'll call it precision ag technology today, that one of the steps that we're recommending the growers to take is to do basically an audit of, they've got this technology, what data truly is being collected with the technology. And I think it's a good exercise to understand, what technology is being used on the farm and what data is or can be collected with that technology on the farm. And with that, I think that begins to understand that, yeah, I'm collecting yield data, but is there some other data that may be being collected? So we talk a lot about machine data today. And so now we not only have yield monitors in the cabs a lot of times, but we have what they call pucks that are pulling data from the CAN bus that relates back to what the machine parameters are. And so, well, if that's being collected, and maybe is a company providing that back, and does that become useful to me to understand how on a field by field basis maybe equipment's being operated and what kind of efficiencies are being actually attained. So when I think about all the all this technology, it is hard, as you mentioned, to keep up with it, but we got so much data that is now beginning to be collected. Truly understanding what technology, just not a display, not a yield monitor, but am I using a puck? What's coming off of that? What can I collect from that? And then what could that inform as part of my operation becomes important.
So you say there's a lot of data. You were part of a project called Terra where you tried to collect the most data ever collected on a single corn plant. And I think that was really eye-opening to me, at least, as to how much data we really have. Can you recall off the top of your head what the number was?
Well, we did that here at the Farm Science Review, or the Molly Cairn Center, and that was a 100-acre field, and using commercial products, very commonly used on Ohio farms today, including imagery, that ended up being over 60 petabytes on that 100-acre field, and it was like 18 gigabytes on the one corn plant. And so a lot of people say, well, that's a lot of data. You look at what a petabyte is, but when you think about 18 gigabytes that truly could be collected, we figured out with the farm manager, Nate Doritas, that only about 25% of that data was actually usable and that he could action with that data. So I don't want to give a sense that all that data was useful. I think there's bits and pieces that were, it's kind of nice to have, but at the end of the day, only 25% of that were actually usable data by Nate in order to inform future processes and decisions. But there's quite a bit of data very quickly that can be collected, especially when we think about all the imagery that's being available today, whether farmers are purchasing or companies offering. There's quite a bit of imagery today that's being collected today on these fields.
So all of the data is pretty much useless until we do some sort of post-processing and analysis. Do you have some tips for what needs to be done as far as post-processing?
Well, I would, one thing is are you working with someone, that trusted advisor, and just making sure you got a complete data set? If not, how are you going to deal with that situation if I didn't quite get a complete field, like a yield map? So making sure that you have a complete data set needs to be kind of a basic check. We do know, going through yield data, and possibly even as planted data occasionally, but specifically yield data, that if we want to utilize that data, that cleaning and taking out some of the erroneous data that could occur for various reasons, that we want to remove that. If we truly are going to take that and use that as information data layer for a fertility if I'm going to take and convert my yield map to a removal map that begins then puts into equation of what am I going to apply back and create a variable rate of phosphorus, potassium, even maybe micros, depending on what the farmer's needs are and that field's needs are. But before we take those steps, having a complete data set, yes or no, and then I think going through and making sure that maybe we need to clean and remove some erroneous data becomes very important, because that impacts ultimately what the rec's going to be putting in next year's machine to apply. So those would be some basic things to consider.
Yeah, making sure that we're starting, since yield data is used in so many different ways, making sure that we have the highest quality data there that we possibly can is incredibly important.
And for someone who's never cleaned data, do you have advice on how they go about that?
Well, I would encourage them to call us at Ohio State and have that discussion, especially if they've never done it, but just to kind of get thoughts on where to start and what to consider. I'm a believer, you just don't remove zero yields and high yielding areas just because they seem out of reach. I think you got to figure out why those areas, from the yield monitor perspective, were in error. But I think getting here with the digital ag team is one start. I mean, I think we've got experience to give some insight. But then I think we also have some consultants in the state that have been looking into it and are starting to get good sound processes in to kind of dive into the data, making sure before it goes into some kind of analytical process that it's cleaned. And so I think there's, we've got pretty good expertise in the state to help growers.
And do you have, if someone's pretty limited on this or just thinking about getting into it, are there a couple pieces of data collection throughout the season that you feel add more value or can help them make better decisions if they don't want to go all into it?
So I think with technology and a lot of just practices that can be evaluated and adopted, I think you always want to take a step into it. I think going from zero to full speed can be a dangerous and sometimes a bad experience for everyone involved. So that would be one thing. I think you need to step in. But at the end of the day, yield mapping ends up being a very critical data layer to begin understanding what's happening within the field. I think the other thing that's an easy step in is making sure that you're doing some kind of grid sampling or zone sampling if you haven't done that again. But one of the real value tools that we found, or two actually, that are becoming fairly inexpensive is number one, collecting spatial data when you're scouting. There's a lot of apps out there today that I can go to a field, and whether it's myself or someone I'm hired or someone, that they can mark a point, they can take a picture, they can take notes right then and there of something that they see in the field. And having that information, especially if I'm not, if I'm a farmer, not the one doing the scouting, or I'm getting out to the field on a routine basis, that information can be very informative as I think ahead and again, look at yield maps or end of season yields of what happened out there. But having a picture, having notes, and having that tied to a location of the field is a very low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, very inexpensive way to begin to learn and understand how that crop's developing, but then also relate that back to ultimately the yield and kind of retelling the season and how it went. The other thing that a lot of companies are offering, again, it's low cost, is the imagery piece. And sometimes just seeing some of the imagery that comes at the end of June and July and even early August, those critical growth stages can really kind of show you, what's happening out there in the field. And again, maybe even force you to go to the field in a few instances and say, what is happening? And that, again, maybe knowledge I wouldn't have known if I didn't see that image and come in.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point that I continually hear throughout presentations and workshops on this topic, is that this technology at least not yet, is able to replace actual boots on the ground and going in and verifying it. So no matter how much technology you have at this point, you still want to get out into the field. And like you said, with aerial imagery, it can certainly help pinpoint us, because walking through a cornfield at tasseling is not fun for anyone. But if you're able to kind of narrow down where you see some problem areas are from aerial imagery, then you don't have to maybe trudge through quite as much corn.
Well, and I think it's pretty cool to have some of these apps today where I can scout, or someone's scouting for me. I have that information. If I'm sitting in the combine going through the field and I'm seeing, again, on the yield monitor, or I see something like lodging or similar type, low yielding area, sometimes, you're looking up at the screen, and if it's all kind of connected up, you see a pin right there. You can connect the pin right in the combine and say, oh, that comes back to that, and that helps connect up why that area is low yield, or maybe something there is not similar to kind of the surrounding area. So.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're not quite at that level where you have the pinpoint on your screen as you're going through the field, you can at least make notes as you're combining, so that you can line it up with your other imagery later too.
Absolutely.
And John, you mentioned yield data being an important piece. And Elizabeth, you're always pushing to calibrate yield monitors. So I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, hopefully for most of us, it's too late to calibrate.
Well, yeah. But for maybe next year.
Yeah, but definitely for next year, it's one of those problems where if you don't teach your yield monitor how to interpret the data that it's seeing, it's going to give you bad data in return. It's like having a test that you didn't study for when you don't calibrate. Mm-hmm. So making sure that your yield data is accurate, calibration is step one for sure. So with all this technology, getting a comfort level with working with it can be a bit of a challenge. And personally, one way I think is a great way to learn how to use this technology is through on-farm research. Do you have any tips for getting started with on-farm research to maybe increase their abilities with their technology?
Well, with all the precision technology that's been adopted, I think conducting on-farm trials is as easy as it's ever been. I mean, whether I write it right into a script or I can go out and do strip trials. I mean, it's great to have the ability at planting to be able to document where my treatments were placed in a field today and have that map, and then coming back and harvesting that with a yield monitor, and it's a great way, in my opinion, for both the grower to get questions answered. It's not as daunting of a task as it used to be, because we're having to stop and weigh and do a lot of things to confirm what we were collecting out there in the field. But with the technology, it's just an easy way to set up, replicated experiments, go out there and execute those, and then have yield monitor data at the end of the day to kind of come back and evaluate and learn from. And so I think today there's a lot of opportunity to, again, going back to one of our earlier discussions, to be able to archive that data, making sure it's accurate, and storing that in a way that and having someone process it. And so, we've been doing quite a bit of on-farm trials here through the eFields program, and of course, Ohio State has a legacy in doing on-farm trials for some time. But the eFields in particular, having that data, working with growers, helping growers advance their operation and making sure their practices are profitable and moving them forward in what they want to accomplish, but also giving us data, at least here at Ohio State, that may even at some point help us make suggestions, make recommendations back as it relates to crop production here in the state. How do I make that work? Sometimes can be a little bit of a challenge because everyone's using different systems. You may have one farmer that's kind of a case, and got one that's an AGCO, maybe running some cleaners, and someone else running some deers. And how to connect all that up can be a challenge, but we've got tools today that's helping make that. I mean, with all the cloud technology and getting that there, Ohio State is part of an effort to promote on-farm research. It's called the Ag Data Coalition, or ADC. They've got a platform today that helps connect up with all these, what we'll call them OEMs, or these manufacturers, clouds. You can pull all that data to one side, organize that data, and then analyze it much quicker just because I'm able to be connected, in my case, connected to a multitude of growers out there that are supporting us, being able to pull their data in, get it organized, and ultimately summarizing it. The ADC is one way. There's others, but ADC helps make efficiency and bring that data in here to us to come up with some new learnings.
So you guys have a newsletter the Precision Ag team sends out. You're on social media. What are some other resources, or expand on those a little bit, how we can get signed up for the newsletter?
So the Digital Ag program does maintain a newsletter that comes out, and folks can send in and request to be on that list. The website has some information, going back to Elizabeth's comments about specific to brands, how to calibrate yield monitors, trying to accumulate that information so people kind of have a one-shop, regardless of the brand that they're using. They can always get and have access to what are the procedures to calibrate. But if you just go on the Precision Ag website, you can find an email there that you can send, and whether it's a question or you want to be on the newsletter, you send a note to the Digital Ag team, and we'll get back with you or get you on the list so you can receive that quarterly newsletter.
Yeah, we'll include the link to the website and the email in the description.
Yes. And for those of you who've been listening for a while, we did start a Facebook page and Twitter account, so we can tweet out some of those links as well. Elizabeth, Agronomy Farm Management, just search that on Facebook or Twitter. They'll be able to find it.
Yeah, on Twitter we're at AFM Podcast, and you should be able to find it the same way on Facebook.
Perfect. So just to recap, as far as getting data out, I think there were 3 main things that came out: backup, export, and then get your cards out before it gets too cold. Does that kind of sum it up pretty good?
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, especially during cleanup here, getting equipment cleaned up, the combine in particular, nothing wrong with getting up there and throwing the thumb drive or compact flash or similar, whatever, and just hit the export button and make sure all that's secure, on that drive that you can take and download to a desktop or laptop, or put in some kind of cloud storage and say, hey, there's my 2018 harvest, maybe, or 2018 planting data. At least you have it organized to that level and know where that is.
Great. Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you out at giving presentations this winter.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.